Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. I thought this talk I would discuss a little bit about knowledge and wisdom and maybe some related concepts in what these two words signify, what they mean, their importance in the Buddhist teachings. In Pali, we have vidya, which could be translated as knowledge, and panya as wisdom, although some translators prefer understanding. That's what Nyanamoli used in the Sudimagga for panya. There's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom. Very broadly speaking, knowledge is the accumulation of details of facts and correlations and contexts and so on. And wisdom is the immediate understanding. One might almost say intuitive, the grasp of reality. The two can go together or they can exist separately. Wisdom is clearly taken to be the higher attribute than knowledge. But as Buddhaghosa says in the Sudimagga, vidya or knowledge is the soil from which understanding or panya grows. Can be the basis for a deeper unfoldment. One way of looking at the difference between the two and their relationship would be in terms of the way our brains work with the right brain, left brain dichotomy. That the right brain would be the seat of wisdom and the left brain of knowledge. The right brain gains a holistic, intuitive grasp of things, but it's not good at details, so its view of things is incomplete and fuzzy. And the left brain has the specific strength of mastering the details and getting a finer grained view, but it's unable to integrate. So with the knowledge gained by the left brain can be taken in by the right brain and made into a richer, more full picture of reality. Of course, that's a very modernist way of looking at it. The ancient Buddhists had no conception of right brain, left brain, but they did have this idea of knowledge and wisdom being two complementary but different aspects of understanding. Knowledge, vidya, the word is related to the Sanskrit Veda. They have the three Vedas are the basis of Hindu religion, the most, the oldest, most fundamental text. And mastery of the three Vedas was considered a primary accomplishment for Brahmins. And as the Buddha often did, he took concepts and words from the older culture and gave them a new twist. And we have the Brahmins praised for having the triple knowledge, the T-Vidya, but the Buddha's T-Vidya, triple knowledge, was his realizations on his awakening night. This is one way that Buddhahood is described. And in the Vinaya text, the Mahāvagga, that details the events of the Buddha's life, the biographical portion of that, it talks about his experience under the Bodhi tree as three realizations in the three watches of the night. The first knowledge that came to the Buddha was the knowledge of his past lives. It said that he saw his own past lives going back many thousands of kappas of time. And he could remember and understand at that time, such was my name, such was my clan, such was my pleasure, such was my pain. And passing away from that existence, I re-arose elsewhere, and there such was my name, etc. So that first knowledge was a complete knowledge of his own personal being. It's like the most complete and profound psychoanalysis you can imagine. He understood his entire history going back many, many thousands of kappas of time, many millions of lifetimes. Well, this was a complete picture of his own existence. So this was a personal understanding. Then in the second watch of the night, he gained a complete understanding of the workings of the law of karma. And he saw in a more general way how the multitude of beings in the world come into existence, perform in that existence, and then cease and re-arise elsewhere according to their karma. And he saw beings coming and going and passing into better or worse existences. His simile was just as one might sit in the middle of a village square and watch people coming to and fro and going into and out of houses and shops. So I could see beings going in and out of birth and death. So this was taking the personal understanding he'd gained in the first watch and generalizing it. Now this was a general principle, not just applied to himself, but to all beings. He could see everybody's turning around on this wheel of karma. So it was an understanding of the nature of samsara. Then in the third watch of the night, and it said that it occurred just at the moment when Venus cleared the horizon. Venus is the morning star. Depending on the time of year, it's either the evening or morning star. So it always rises before dawn. And the Buddha gained the knowledge of the extinction of the asavas, or the root defilements. So he understood, had the attainment of complete purification of his being. All his defilements were eliminated at that moment. And this was the attainment of Buddhahood. And these three accomplishments, the three steps to Buddhahood, are given the name of Vidya, of the three knowledges, because it's something that the Buddha knew. And this is a kind of very high, obviously, a very high transcendental kind of knowledge. Knowledge can also apply to any set of facts, of information that we accumulate. This is our knowledge. It can be, mundane, worldly knowledge, like computer programming or learning a foreign language. All these things are kinds of knowledge. But in terms of Dhamma knowledge, Vidya usually refers to a study of the teachings, the corpus of teachings. And that can be a lifetime study, because the teachings in Buddhism are quite extensive. The Pali Canon alone is encyclopedic, a couple of bookshelves at least to fill up the whole Pali Canon. And then there's the commentaries and there's all the modern writings. And then there are even more extensive collections of texts in other schools of Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism has an enormous corpus of scriptures. Traditionally in Old Tibet, to get a degree as a master of the teachings was a 20-year course. A person would have to be in the monastic school for 20 years to get this geshe degree. And a lot of the Buddhist teachings, just considering the Pali Canon, a lot of the teachings are very detailed, and we have collections like the Anguttara Nikaya that's all these lists. And then we have a specialized Pitaka, a whole Pitaka, the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which is very technical details about how the mind works and how mental states relate. So one can approach the study of Buddhism in this very intellectual way and strive for a mastery of all these details. The other side of the teaching is the wisdom side, the panya, which is direct understanding, immediate intuitive understanding, which cannot be gained from reading or studying alone, but requires the direct perception with the mind of fundamental reality. So this is largely gained through meditation. We talked last week about vipassana meditation. This is really the disciplined way of examining phenomena within the mind to gain a penetration of reality. The other approach to this same goal is the way that's spoken of more in the Thai tradition, the forest teachings, of letting the citta operate unobstructedly and striving to be centered in that clear knowing, which is the root of wisdom itself. It's just this clear knowing. And I think we can see, in the broad spectrum of Buddhism, we can see that there's always been a kind of a tension between these two ways of the way of wisdom and the way of knowledge. You have schools and periods of time when there's a great attention to detailed scholarly work. One example in the Theravada of that would be the period of Buddhaghosa and the formulation of the commentaries. If you ever dip into the commentaries at all, and we have in the library here several parts of the commentaries and translations, little booklets that were put out by BPS with the commentaries to specific suttas, and they're quite interesting. See how they, the commentators, mostly it was Buddhaghosa, but he was like the editor. He wasn't necessarily the author of the entire commentaries. But their approach is to really delve into the nitty-gritty, the picayune little details, very kind of pedantic approach at times, defining words and explaining things, filling in the gaps. The criticism of the commentaries would be that it's a very rigid kind of a system. The commentaries are not comfortable at all with any kind of possible contradictions or inconsistencies, and will go to great lengths to try and reconcile things that seem contradictory or paradoxical. A very precise way of thinking. Whereas often in the original suttas, the Buddha would speak in a much more evocative, almost at times actually poetic way of speaking, that he would try to lead the listener towards wisdom, towards a direct understanding. Not so much by pointing out details and facts, but by trying to steer your mind in that direction. At other times and places in Buddhist history, we've had reactions against an overly scholarly approach. We see a large element of that in Zen, and there's some of that in the Thai forest tradition. The famous quote from Ajahn Chah when someone asked him about how much Abhidhamma you should study. He just tapped himself on the chest and says, all the Abhidhamma I need is right here. So wisdom, panya, is something we should perhaps define a little bit. The simplest definition is understanding according to reality and not otherwise, but that kind of begs the question of what is reality, what is truth. And it is possible to be, of course, fooled, to think you have wisdom when you have complete misunderstanding. One kind of maybe illustrative approach is from Tibetan Buddhism. There's a teaching about four wisdoms, four kinds of wisdom, and they're arranged in a mandala. On the left and right are the wisdom of equality and the wisdom of discrimination, and at the top and bottom are the wisdom of voidness and the wisdom of the deathless. The wisdom of equality and the discriminating wisdom are the pair that are more applicable immediately often to the immediate practical work and understanding of the mind. There are these two ways of penetrating reality, and one by itself is partial and incomplete. The discriminating wisdom discerns the difference and the particularities in things. And the wisdom, the equalizing wisdom, sees the ways in which things are the same or what they have in common. So in terms of penetrating the dhammas of the mind, to take the case of doing rigorous vipassana or any kind of introspection, examination of the dhammas arising in the mind, there's obviously a place for both of these. The discriminating wisdom allows you to see, well, this is a sense impression, this is a sensation, this is a mental formation, this is a memory, this is a speculation. So you're seeing precise categorization of dhammas, but then the equalizing wisdom sees that they're all empty, they're all impermanent, they're all suffering. So that the two together give you a complete picture of fundamental nature of reality. And these can be, of course, applied at a very fine grain, a very precise, momentary approach, but this can be applied in a more broad brush way to our general understanding of reality in general. And the wisdom of voidness and the wisdom of the deathless are ways of understanding the fundamental reality, and they point to beyond samsara even and look at our understanding of the unconditioned. The emptiness or voidness of things is the most universal characteristic because it applies to both samsara and nibbana. Both the conditioned and the unconditioned are sunya, are empty. And the understanding of the deathless, and sometimes I've seen this translated as a wisdom of immortality, which I think is a bit misleading and unfortunate, but that's seeing that there is that which is beyond birth and death. And these two are also complementary understandings, and one alone is incomplete and leads to subtle delusions. And this is seen in Buddhist thought historically, the wavering between annihilationism and eternalism, that the middle path between the two is like a razor's edge. And it's possible to emphasize one side over the other and fall into either the idea of annihilationism, that the goal or nibbana is a simple non-existence, or to fall into eternalism and see it as some kind of eternal, immortal existence. And it's very easy to fall off that razor edge because the human mind is cannot really understand an intellectual way. And this is the big weakness of the side of knowledge, of vidya, that nibbana cannot be described or understood or dealt with on that intellectual level. And attempts to do so will always be misleading and will always bring the practitioner off onto one of those two opposite ends, where it's only the understanding by direct knowledge or direct wisdom as penetrating of reality that can lead to an understanding of nibbana. This is seen in the formula for the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth, the truth of suffering, which is the truth that deals particularly with samsara. The Buddha said the task is to understand it, and the verb is pajanati, which implies that it can be understood. So it can be grasped by the mind. We can understand. It's not simple or easy to get a full grasp or understanding of samsaric reality, but there's nothing within conditioned samsaric reality that's beyond our possibility of comprehension. But the third noble truth, he doesn't use that verb at all. He says that the goal is to understand in a different way or penetrate or know from the inside. The verb is patisamvedi. It's entirely different verb, and it doesn't have anything to do with an intellectual understanding, but a direct realization, which is only attainable through that quality of wisdom. As Buddhaghosa said, knowledge can be the soil from which wisdom arises. We can lay the foundations and gain a framework. He uses that analogy like farming. You prepare the soil, but you don't make the plants sprout. They do that on their own. So I think I'll stop it there. Sufficient for this afternoon.